Welcome to the very first episode of Leading with Empathy. This session is focused on feedback, hard feedback. How do you give people hard feedback in an empathetic way that still gets us the outcomes that we really need and desire? Now, what we know is that great teams are great at communicating. They speak to each other well, they communicate effectively, messages are shared, and of course, the real question we have when we're thinking about these teams is what happens when something goes wrong? What do they do? How do they respond? Do they support each other? Do they give each other honest feedback? What takes place next really matters, because when things go wrong, often emotions go up. Pressure increases, challenges come around us more frequently, and we have to respond quickly. Now, if we think about this in a slightly different way, let me ask you a simple question. Why do you feel pain? You put your hand on something really hot or something sharp, and immediately a signal is sent from the nerve endings in this hand of yours to your brain to say something's wrong. Pain is one of these things that's a signal to your brain from your body to tell you that the way you're interacting with the world is causing damage and you need to change. You need to stop. You need to take different action. This is a feedback loop, isn't it? This is exactly what feedback is. It's a feedback loop from your interaction with the environment, telling your brain whether it's good or bad, in this case bad, and that you need to change. The same thing happens in teams. Someone does something. Someone behaves or says or does something that isn't appropriate, that's damaging, that causes issues. There's mistakes. There's a whole bunch of things that we know create damage for a team. Now, if there is no feedback, if that feedback loop doesn't happen, what we know is that the damage increases. Often it intensifies. In the same way that if you put your hand on a hot plate and the nerve endings decided not to tell you about it, you would create a huge amount of damage. So we must give feedback. It is vital to give feedback when damage is being done. Far more important to do it then than almost any other time when we give feedback. So I want to talk about how to give feedback with some empathy. The first thing we need to focus on is our intent for giving feedback. This is really important. There's these three modes that I often see when people are giving feedback: being cruel, being kind, and being nice. So let's unpack these and what they look like, and maybe you can have a think about which of these is your default mode or intent when you're giving feedback. So the first is, as we said, being cruel. What does being cruel look like? Being cruel is a public dressing down. It's telling someone off. It's telling them how wrong they are, often in front of people. It's often loud. And most of the time, it's actually not about the other person. In general, what I see most often is when people are being cruel, it's a display of control and obedience. I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. I'm going to tell you off in front of everyone. And it's sort of sometimes that chest beating, yelling, throwing things. Look, it's less common than it used to be, but we have to admit, in a lot of cases, it's incredibly selfish. It's really about the person giving the feedback trying to stamp their sense of control. Now, the good news is this happens far less frequently than it used to. It used to happen a lot more. And if you've been around the workforce for a while or worked in some of those industries where this is common, you'll know that it's not very friendly to be around. And because it's not very welcome anymore, what I see a lot of people doing is pushing way down the other end. Instead of being cruel, they're being nice. Now, being nice is wanting to be the nice person. This is wanting to be friendly, wanting to keep the peace. I'll sugarcoat this feedback down so much that it's a bit sweeter. I might do the old feedback sandwich, you know what they call that, where I put the bread really thick and then just a little slither of the bad stuff in the middle and hope they don't taste it. People walk away from this type of feedback thinking, hang on, did I just get told off or am I awesome? It's hard to tell. It's confusing sometimes, and the worst manifestation of nice feedback is silence. I just won't say anything at all. I'll just let it go. Now, can we agree that this is incredibly damaging? Imagine you put your hand on the hot plate and your hand thinks, oh, I don't want to upset the brain, I won't say anything. It's incredibly, what we know is that more damage will be done. It's going to be devastating, isn't it? Worst case scenario is I say nothing at all. They get no signal. They keep doing what they're doing and the damage intensifies. Can we also really openly admit that this is selfish? Sure, people say they don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, but most of the time it's actually our fear, isn't it? It's our avoidance, not wanting to be the person who says those things. It's selfish, and we need to stop it. When we're going to give hard feedback, when we're going to give that tough feedback, that corrective feedback, whatever you want to call it, the important thing before we even start is to think about our intent. Our intent needs to be kind. Our intent needs to be, I care about this person. I want to support this person. I love this person and I really want to help them be their best. It's about them. It's not about me. It might be hard for me to say something. It might be uncomfortable for me to say something, but I have to say something because I care about them and this is too important to not say something. That's what leadership is all about. It's being kind and caring about those people enough to let them know they're doing something that's creating damage and it must change. Giving good feedback starts with your intent. Now, a couple of things to think around with your intention here, and this is an activity that I want you to drop into and have a think about right now. Think about the last time that you gave feedback to someone. What was your intention? How are you feeling? Think about the emotions that were going through your body. Were they about you? Or were they about the other person? Were they caring? Or were they angry? It's okay to admit, to reflect, and think about those things. But the important piece is think about the next time you're going to give feedback. Think about someone you might need to give feedback to right now. How are you feeling about them? What's your intention for giving them that feedback? What do you want for them from this exercise? And what we know that we should be able to do more often is to be able to get our minds in that right frame. Maybe it's going for a walk. If you're feeling like your blood's boiling and you need to say something, maybe it's taking that little bit of time, going for a walk, grabbing a coffee, doing what you need to do to wrestle and control your emotions and be able to be in the right headspace to make sure that your feedback is effective. Because it is so important to get this right. Now you might be thinking, okay, I can be in the right headspace, but what do I say? So let's talk about a really powerful model that helps you to think about the types of feedback that you're going to be able to give. Helps you map out what you might need to say to make sure this feedback's effective. Now, this model is slightly modified from a beautiful friend of mine, Patria King. She designed this and developed this, and it is just so powerful that I can't help but wanting to share this with the world. This feedback model is just 4 simple sentences. But the intention is that we sit down and we write our 4 sentences well before we walk in and start to give feedback. We sit down and we plan, what do I need to say? And this feedback model gives us a beautiful little map to help us navigate the things that we need to say to make sure we're giving feedback in a way that's going to be helpful and caring to that person. Now, the first part is pretty simple. It's the I noticed sentence. So what I want you to do here is think about what was the objective behavior you're giving feedback about. Now, the words objective behavior are very important here. Very, very important. If I started a bit of feedback by saying, hey, so I noticed you being a jerk, what would I expect the person to do? They would say, no, I'm not. They might not say it out loud, but in their head, I can guarantee you that's what's going through their mind. So I need to make sure that I'm giving them a very specific, objective behavior that they can identify and agree with. I might say, hey, I noticed you were late to the last 3 team meetings. Now, if I said, I notice you're late all the time, they might say, no, I was early yesterday when I went home. So we need to be very clear. I noticed you were late to the last three team meetings. It sets a very clear, very objective yes or no answer, and in their mind, they can understand what we're talking about. If we're on the same page from the start, we're in good water here. If we're not on the same page in this first sentence, things are going to be very challenging. Once I've said my own noticed sentence, the second sentence is the I imagine. Here, we want to think about, well, why might they have done this? Not in our words, not in a simple explanation that we make up on the spot, but actually thinking about why might they have done this behavior. And here we might want to leave some space for them to reply, for them to offer some explanations or suggestions or thoughts. They might have some, they might not. So I might say, hey, I noticed you're late to the last three team meetings. I imagine you've got a lot going on. What's up? What's happening? Here's where I can offer that piece of empathy. Here's where I can support them by thinking about what could be driving this for them and leaving some space for them to share what's going on in their world. If people don't feel heard and understood, they will disengage. And what we want to be doing here is making sure that we're engaging them in a conversation. So they might offer some explanations. Yeah, look, there's a lot going on. There's troubles at home. My dog died. There could be a whole bunch of things happening, yeah? And at that point, too often, feedback ends. We say, oh, okay, well, don't do it again, and we all sort of walk away. But in my view, this is not good enough. This is not effective feedback. The third sentence is vitally important. This is where we say, I think. And we describe the consequences of this behavior and the damage it causes on the team. So I noticed you were late to the last three team meetings. I imagine you got a lot going on. What's happening? And tell us, yes, there's a lot happening, da da da. Great. Well, look, I think every time you're late, it actually creates a lot of tension in the team. It causes us to have arguments and discussions around you rather than the work we're doing. It's putting a project behind, whatever the case might be. If you're talking to someone about a safety issue, hey, I noticed you weren't wearing your safety equipment on site yesterday, and I imagine you find it quite uncomfortable. But I think when you don't wear your safety equipment, you put your life at risk, you put our business at risk, everyone's jobs at risk, and it's really, really vitally important that you do. We can't leave these consequences to chance. We can't assume that they know them. We must be explicit. It's too important to leave this hanging. The I think, look, it could be I feel. It could be you can change the wording here. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what we really need to make sure we do with this third sentence is be very clear that the behavior is unacceptable and it creates damage and problems for the team or for the person themselves. I mean, if a consequence is they're going to lose their job, when should you tell them? As soon as possible, right? And that leads us to our final sentence. This is where we're going to ask them what is going to happen next. This is where we might describe or set some parameters of what you want to see happening going forward. And again, this last sentence can flex quite a lot depending on the situation because the situations are complex and there's lots of variation. I might say, hey, I noticed you're late to the last three team meetings. I imagine you got a lot on your plate. But I think every time you're late, it puts a lot of pressure on the team. It's putting our project behind. And I might say, I want to sit down, look at your diary, look at all the priorities, and see if we can make sure that you're adjusting those things so that you're on time for all of our meetings going forward. It could be quite a collaborative final sentence. It can also be very directive. Hey, I noticed you weren't wearing your safety gear. I imagine you find it uncomfortable, but I think not wearing it puts your life at risk, our license at risk. So I want you to wear your safety equipment every day without missing, or you're going to get an official warning and possibly lose your job. There's a lot of flexibility in these sentences, but the absolute critical way to use them is to sit down well before you're about to give feedback and write them out so you know what you need to say. Now, when you first start doing this, you might find it useful to take these notes with you so that you sit down and talk to the person and you've got them in front of you because things will happen. People will get upset, you'll get worried and your nerves or emotions will start to overcome you. And it's easy at that time to press the eject button and get out of there. but it's far too important to let it go. I want to encourage you to push through that discomfort and make sure you say what needs to be said. You need to be agreeing some actions that are going to take place going forward for either yourself and or the other person to make sure that change will occur. It's also a very useful tip if you are having this conversation to say to the person, hey, look, I'm going to just type up some notes in an email based on what we talked about and share it with both of us so we're both on the same page with where we're going from here. This is a really important piece to add into your feedback routine, because when things go sideways, and we don't want them to, but sometimes they do, when we get into a performance management process or any other legal process, a record of the conversations and discussions and the things that you have gone on between you and this person will be very, very useful. It's also great that if you've agreed a set of actions, to document them and share them so you're both accountable and on the same page with what's going to happen next. So I want you to try this. I want you to jump in now and think about a person that you need to give feedback to. It might be someone at work, it might be someone at home. Hey, I noticed you didn't unpack the dishwasher again. I imagine you didn't think much of it, etc., etc. So there's lots of opportunity for you to practice this. I know people who try it on their kids, on their partner, on the people that they work with, and it's a really important thing to get good at. Now, I want you to write out the 4 sentences, find someone neutral, someone who you trust, who you can confide in, and give the feedback to them as if it was that person and see what they say. See how it feels. Experience it. If you don't have that person, get in touch. We'll set up a video call and I'd love to hear your feedback. It's vitally important that we get so much better at this incredibly important skill. So when you're thinking about giving feedback, make sure you're thinking about these things. What's my intention? How am I showing up? What do I want for this person? What's the objective behavior that might have been driving this feedback I need to give? What might be going on for them? What are the consequences if this doesn't change? And what actions do I want to see going forward so that we get a better outcome? At the end of the day, giving feedback is so important. Thinking about these different factors is vital. And just a few pieces to consider. Again, your intention, also their mood. What mood are they in? Are they feeling okay? Are they feeling a little anxious? What's the environment I'm going to give the feedback in? Should we go to a coffee shop? Or maybe we need to sit in a meeting room where there's a bit more privacy and confidentiality. Also, make sure you have adequate time for not only you to say what you need to say, but to listen and hear the replies from the other person. I really hope this has helped in terms of your feedback skills. Giving good feedback is so important. Give it a go. Reach out if I can help some more. I'd love to hear your feedback tales. And until next time, hope to see you with the next Leading with Empathy.